Hi, good morning. Thank you all for being here with us for the Humanities Festival. We're so pleased to host a wonderful lineup of speakers today. I'd like to announce once again that after this session, there is opportunity to speak with our presenter and our most recent presenter, Stephen Siegel, in the True Atrium. We will also have lunch provided today, courtesy of J&S Chinese Food. But I would like to remind everyone not to bring food or drink into the auditorium. Now, as you've been coming in, you probably picked up a program. There's also evaluation forms. We do appreciate any feedback that you would like to provide in planning for future events. And we do host the Humanities Festival every year. This is our 33rd year. And next year, we already are thinking about a topic around the world. So if that spurs your interest, I hope you'll be looking for that in the coming months. I also would like to acknowledge Gail as our sign language interpreter yesterday and today. You know, it's a tremendous amount of work, and we really appreciate her efforts. Also, at this point, I'd like to once again thank our sponsors, Casper College and the Casper College Foundation. We're a partner with the Wyoming Humanities Council as well. We receive support on campus too from the School of Fine Arts and Humanities, the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and the School of Health Science. So today we will have Jared Bush's presentation, and as I said, then we will take a short break, but we will then come back into the auditorium at 12:30 for an artist talk. If you've had an opportunity to view the artworks in the gallery, the artists Megan Roswell and Mariah Wimmer will be here to talk about their show, Spooky Action at a Distance, which also speaks to quantum entanglement. This term has been used quite a bit over the course of our Humanities Festival. And then we will have our Redstone recital today. So we're capping off the event with a musical performance. And please note that the dance performance that began or debuted last evening, A Rock and Roll Fantasy, will continue at the Gertrude Krampert Theater, and the production begins tonight at 7:30. You can obtain tickets by calling the box office. My name is Valerie Mayers, and I represent the Humanities Festival Committee, and I'm very pleased now to bring Dr. Evan Rodkey, our Professor of Archaeology and Anthropology, to the stage to begin our session with Jared Bush. Thank you.
Hello, am I standing in the right place yet? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Valerie. So yeah, I'm Evan Rodkey, and I'm a professor in anthropology here at Casper College. I teach anthropology, sociology, and our religion course. And I see several of my students in here, so some of you already knew that. So, okay, so I'm here to introduce Jared Bush. So, excuse me. Jared has written a few movies you may have heard of, and I brought visual aids here. Zootopia, right, by this little startup called Disney. Someday they're going to make it, I know it. But anyway, it's out there. And also Moana, okay? So Jared, both of those, by the way, were nominated for Academy Awards. And Zootopia, I got it right. Yes, Zootopia actually won one. So Jared Bush is actually an old friend of mine. I knew him several years ago when I lived in California. I started a job working with the woman who became his wife. My wife and I, Lisa here, one of our first dates was actually their wedding. And we lost touch a few, we both have 3 kids. We're both doing things like writing for Disney and teaching classes and things like that. So I texted Jared, I don't know, about 6 months ago or so, and said, hey, we have this Humanities Festival thing going on. You know, is this something you would be interested in? And he wrote back in like 5 minutes and said, yes, sure, I'll be there. So not only do we have a very talented writer who can tell us a lot about that process, but we also have a really nice guy, really wonderful guy here in our community. It is his first time at Casper College. It's his first time in the state of Wyoming, which, by the way, is getting very good reviews. And I would like to have Jared go ahead and come up. I would like to present Jared with the Margaret Demarest certificate. So these These lectures are in honor of Margaret Demarest, a former English professor here at the college. And Jared, this is for you.
Oh my God, awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, and this goes with it as well.
Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so without further ado, Jared Bush. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Thank you. All right. How's everybody doing? We'll get to the trash truck later. That'll make sense down the road. Real tough act to follow after Steve just brought the house down. I was worried, honestly, that we were going to have crossover in what we were talking about today, but I think that we're probably going to be all right. So I want to talk about quantum storytelling, which I picked up by myself without any help from anybody else. Something I've come to just off the top of my mind, and I'm really excited to talk about it. Okay, I'm not doing that. But it's an awesome process, so I'm going to steal it because it's great. So today, I'm going to kind of walk you through the process that I've learned over the last 15 years of telling stories. Like Evan said, this is my first time in Wyoming, and it's awesome. Last night, I saw 2 deer running across the street, and I was like, this is amazing. And I went back to the hotel, I'm like, I saw 2 deer. And they were like, whatever. I thought it was awesome, so I'm excited about it. So why am I here? What am I going to talk about? I'm a writer and a director at Disney Animation, so I thought that today I would talk about writing for Disney Animation, or as I like to call it, the 1,000th times the charm. We go through a lot of iterations, and I love it. And it's a very specific, unique process to storytelling that I've never experienced anywhere else. So this has been in my brain for the last 7 years. Today I'm going to try to put it into your brain. But actually, like Steve said, there's no right way to do anything. This is just something that's really opened up storytelling and character for me. And so everything I'm going to say today, take it with a grain of salt. If it's helpful, awesome. If it's not helpful, awesome. Find your own process. It's really important. So to understand my process and how I got here, I need to take you guys back in time to 1987. Steve had a pretty traumatic childhood. Usually writers in Hollywood are kind of known for one-upping each other in terms of stories. His trauma, my trauma, I also had a significant trauma, which was I looked like that, and I was given those glasses. And they kind of had a fade on them. But that's me in 1987. But the important thing that happened in 1987 was that my dad bought that. For the younger people here, that's a camcorder. And that thing weighed about 80 pounds, had big old tapes that went in. My grandmother especially loved to tell stories. My grandfather on my mom's side also loved to tell stories. And we would sit around and just try to come up with things that inspired us or were funny or were emotional. And most of the stories I grew up with weren't stories from books. They were stories that were made up on the spot, and I loved it. And once I had a camcorder and I could make my own stories, I did that all the time. This is obviously before the internet, so you couldn't post them online. You would take your little video and you'd go to your friend's house and you'd watch it and you made a movie. So you guys have probably heard of my first 6 movies, which were Love Hostages 1, Love Hostages 2, then Love Hostages 3. After that was Love Hostages 4. And we mixed it up and went to Love Hostages 5 and finished with Love Hostages 6. So that was 1987 to 1992. Those are not on the internet for reasons that you would know if you saw them. But I had a really great time doing it. So the one thing I had at this age that's most important, I think any creative person would say, is passion. Passion to tell stories, passion to create. And that was my fuel. And so I went to college and I was an English and American literature major. And then shortly thereafter, I moved to Los Angeles to pursue a dream of getting into the entertainment industry. Honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do there. I knew I wanted to get involved. I didn't know how. My first job was as a script reader. I did that for 3 years, and honestly, it was the best education I've ever gotten. You really get a sense of what works and what doesn't, and what's compelling and what isn't. You hear a lot of stories about people kind of making it overnight and these overnight success stories. I know no one like that. I know a lot of people who work their asses off for decades, and that's kind of what I did. I just tried and tried and tried and tried, and eventually, oh, thanks. Your mic died. Oh, did it? My mic died. How's this one? Better? Yeah? All right. I made my way out to Los Angeles, and eventually weaseled my way into working at Disney Animation. All of my work before that point was working in live action. It was not animation. So this was new for me. I got there, I co-wrote and co-directed Zootopia. That was my first job there. And then I went on to write Moana. I'm currently writing and directing something new I can't talk about yet, but I'm really excited about. And trying to use all of the lessons I learned over those films and applying them to this new one. So in my 7 years so far at Disney Animation, I've learned that writing for animation is very different. But to understand why it's different than the other media that you might come into contact with, I thought I'd give you guys a glimpse into that, the two main types of writing in entertainment. First off is writing for television. My first jobs after becoming a script reader, I worked in television for a few years. So television writing is extremely collaborative, and it's iterative. Usually we had 10 to 12 writers sitting around a table working, building a series together as a team. We'd start out with a story arc for the entire season, and then we'd find 3 or 4 key episodes, tentpole episodes, to support that season arc. And then we'd start to fill in the rest of the season with little story nuggets. We'd spitball ideas for episodes, which we'd flesh out with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then we'd start to work on an outline. A writer would then, with a good outline, would go off and write the script, write that episode, return to the team with a first draft. You would get barraged with notes. You'd then go and write another draft. You'd bring it back, and then you'd send it to the studio. And you do another draft, and then you send it to the network, and you get notes and do another draft. And then once you did all of that, you'd bring the actors in, and the actors would read that script, and you would rewrite it. And then you would go to a stage, and you'd watch the actors rehearse it, and then you would rewrite it again. And you do that every single day for 5 days, and then finally tape it in front of a live audience, finish it, edit it, and usually cut 20% out of it, and then finally air it. It's a lot of work, and you are constantly churning, and it's something that I loved because you have so many bites at the apple. For me, sitcom writing was very quick and very iterative. It's less about polish and more about moving mass quantity on a schedule. Sometimes your episode, frankly, was a B- instead of an A. Too bad, yet you really had to keep moving because there were 18 more episodes to go, and that train was moving, and you could not stop it, for better or for worse. What's great about that, though, is you have to make decisions. You have to put a stake in the ground and say, okay, I think it's going to be made about this, and do your best to get there. For me, by the way, every slide you see here, I found out yesterday, Disney marketing was like, you can't bring any slides from anything else other than Disney. So you're going to get a lot of ABC and Disney slides today. I didn't work on any of this stuff. They're awesome shows, but yeah, I wish I worked on all these shows because they're awesome, but no, I can't take credit for any of this. But it is television. Importantly in television and how it really works and how you can work so quickly is by knowing who your characters are. I could work that fast because I knew those main characters, I knew their voices. I was not reinventing characters. I was continuing their journey in the most entertaining and compelling way possible. For the most part in television, characters kind of stay the same, right? Seinfeld better be neurotic next week. If he's not, you're like, who is that? Doesn't make any sense. So really you're trying to stay in a lane. What I love about television and working in television was the collaboration. I loved the immediate feedback. I loved the iteration. I loved the pressure of deadlines. I actually really loved the lack of perfectionism and preciousness. You had to just keep going. Feature writing is a very different animal. I worked as a live-action feature writer for 7 years. Feature writers work in a completely different environment. It's basically just you. You're kind of in your creepy little writing cave, and you're very lonely. And then after like 4 months, you emerge with the script that you poured your heart into. I love that also. But interestingly, for many writers, there's no crossover between TV and film, meaning I had different agents for television and film. My expertise in one area had very little to do with the other. So I worked in television for 7 years. When I went over to features, none of that made any difference to anybody. I had to start from square one again. It's a different muscle, it's a different discipline, it's a different medium. Feature writing is, again, not my movies, but they're awesome. Did you guys see Black Panther? It was amazing. Yeah, you did. I love it. Yes, very good. So feature writing is long form. And as you guys know, typically characters in features, they change, or the world change. There's arcs to those characters. What that means is that every single moment, every episode, every moment, every scene has to build to those moments of evolution so that they feel earned and that they feel organic. They also have to be economical, right? Most movies are 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours, unless it's James Cameron and there's 3 hours, but really it's 90 minutes or 120 minutes. Not a whole lot of time to believably change a world or a character's point of view. It requires precision, it requires planning, careful pacing, and a deep knowledge of story. I think these are a feature writer's greatest strengths, knowing story, structure, and character really, really well. By the time that most feature writers are lucky enough to have work produced, most have worked for years or decades, have written dozens of original scripts, completed hundreds of rewrites. So I'd say 95% of the work I've done has never been produced. It's really hard, but that doesn't mean that's not an opportunity to learn. And I think that good screenwriters, with every project they work on, whether or not it's made, they use that time to get better at what they do, to learn new things, and to evolve. As a feature writer, what I learned the most was to build from character, psychology, and emotion. This is my bread and butter. I need to get to know characters inside and out. I need to build them as real people. Steve actually said, don't write what you know, but who you are. I think that's 100% correct. I think that you need to get into these characters' heads to make them human, to make them honest. I think many audiences, they know when there's a disconnect, when someone doesn't feel real, and they kind of pull back from that. So the more realness you can deliver, I think the more involved and the more compelling stories can be. And what's really cool, actually, is that when you get to know those characters really well, the characters tell you what the story needs to be. You stop trying to puppet a character to do something you want and say, what if I just give them an interesting situation and you let the characters figure their own way out of it? I didn't learn that for a really long time, and I kept on wondering, like, why? It's a really cool scene. Why do you guys not like it? It's because the character was behaving in odd manners that they ordinarily wouldn't. And you know when you watch a movie and you're like, I just don't buy that character would do that. That's a result of trying to make your character do something in a plot as opposed to understanding your character and letting them drive that plot forward. So the two disciplines I've worked in and what I think defines them most. Television, it's collaboration, it's iteration, it's fluidity, trial and error, and characters stay constant. For live action feature writing, I think it's really a singular vision, usually filmmaker, writer, director. Precision, usually world building, immersion, world or the character changes, or the world or the character arcs. So this is what, for me, and at least in my experience, I learned the most about these things. But then came something new for me. Like I said, about 7 years ago, I went to go work for Disney Animation, which I tried really hard. I badgered them for a really, really long time before they let me in there. And I discovered something very interesting, which is that Disney Animation, it's weirdly a combination of all of the things that I love. By the way, I just found out that it could do that transition, and I was super stoked. I figured that out on the plane. So this is the peak of this presentation today, what you just saw. So what I loved about this is it literally has everything I loved, and I didn't know I could get all of these flavors in the same place. And when I first got to Disney, my contract was for 8 weeks. I had an 8-week contract. At the end of that 8 weeks, I'd either stayed for another 8 weeks, or they said, beat it. And I had 8-week contracts for a while, but so on day 2, when I saw that I could do all of this and this place was all of these things, I said, I'm never leaving, and you can't make me go. And I stayed, and I made sure that they could not drag me out of that building, and it worked out. So I've been there for 7 years. So one of the big questions that most people ask is, how are stories built here? Disney animation is very unique for Hollywood in that all stories come from within the building. Usually, when I did work for Sony or for Fox, I'd come up with an idea, and I'd bring it to them, and I'd say, here's my idea. And they say, we like it or we don't, we're going to buy that idea. And Disney, nothing comes from the outside. Everything is internal, built within this building, and every person that works for Disney Animation also works within this building. So it's about 800 people that work on every Disney movie, and we're a really tight-knit family. So how are stories built at Disney Animation? Because I didn't know before I got there how it was possible. It starts with the kernel. What does that mean? What do you care about? It's usually a filmmaker, typically a director or a director-writer. What do you care about the most? What is your passion? These seem like very basic things, but it's more than just, I want to tell a story about this interesting plot. It's really, what deep down do you really, really care about and want to share with your peers, with an audience, and with the world? And it's an amazing opportunity. I didn't realize till I got there that for Disney Animation specifically, these are movies that go around the world. Literally millions of people see them. And someone said to me, well, that's an opportunity to say something. What do you want to say? You only have so many shots to communicate something. It better mean something. And that's what this idea of starting with a kernel is all about. I think for anyone trying to tell stories or to get into entertainment, you really want to put yourself out there and say who you are and why this matters to you. So what do you want to say? So for Zootopia, Byron Howard, my directing partner, who actually hired me into Disney in the first place, for Zootopia, early on, he wanted to tell a story about stereotype and bias. And he wanted to do that through the lens of the animal world to make it more accessible, so he could talk about difficult things and not have it be off-putting, and so that people could read their own situations into these animals. There was not a direct correlation with ethnicity or gender or culture with these animals. You could read into it what you wanted to, and that was really important to him. That was his kernel and where he started. For Moana, Ron Clemens and John Musker, the directors of Moana, were blown away by the history and the culture of the amazing navigators and wayfinders of the Pacific Islands, and they wanted to share that with the world. And they spent a lot of time there talking to elders and tattoo artists and dancers and navigators to try to get a true sense of those stories. Once you have this kernel, this nugget, and you really care about it, and you can defend it, and you honestly decide that you want to spend the next 4 to 6 years of your life trying to hone this, which is a long time, then you are ready for phase 2, that I call, and then comes marriage. What does that mean? Get ready for a really horrific slide, you guys. Here it is. So that's me and Byron. Then comes marriage. Typically at Disney, a writer is brought in to work with a director. You form a storytelling team. So true story here, this is actually at the Disney Animal Kingdom. When we were doing research, we had to go meet some hippos. And they said, you can't wear your regular clothes or the hippos will freak out. And they said, so we're going to put you in our zookeeper outfits so that they won't be scared and they won't attack you. And I said, okay. And they said, here's the shorts. And the shorts were size 28 waist. And I was like, nope, that's not even close to the realm of possibility for me. But I put them on. And it hurt a lot, and I barely got them on, and we walked out to see the hippos, and every other zookeeper was wearing a different uniform than we were wearing. And they're like, well, those are the old ones from like 3 years ago. And I'm like, why did I have to change? Like, there's like the hippos obviously are used to different outfits, so why am I wearing that? But now I have that picture to share with you guys. Research is a big part of what happens at Disney Animation. Mainly, and we go around the world, or sometimes we go into our backyard. For instance, A Bug's Life at Pixar. They didn't go on a safari like we did for Zootopia. For Bug's Life, they literally went outside of their building to a planter, and they looked at insects in the dirt. I got to go to the safari, which I think is better for me. I thought that was awesome. For Moana, we went to islands around the South Pacific. The really important thing here is why do we do that? Is because we are searching for honesty and authenticity. We don't want to make a copy of a copy. Like if you're doing a spy movie, we wouldn't watch a bunch of spy movies and make our own spy movie. We would talk to spies. We would talk to people that are part of that world because we want to find something that is real and different and specific and something that only our movie can provide. And for Zootopia, we didn't really talk story for 8 months. We did tons and tons and tons of research. The cinematographer of Zootopia got bitten by a zebra and got kicked by an ostrich in the crotch, and then got smacked in the back by a cheetah. Those all happened within like 2 weeks. Actually, his name is Nate. We called him Nate the Bait because anytime there's an animal around, he would be attacked. But that meant that we weren't attacked, so we always had him in the vicinity. That's true. So we look for that authenticity. As we're doing this research, we're also thinking about character and thematics. Like Steve also said, thinking about thematics, what you want to say, what you want the character to go through. It's not really about plot. It's about what's the feeling, trying to figure out how to communicate something. Sometimes when you get into plot, you start to really get lost in the details, and sometimes it's not about that. If I can't tell you the story in a couple minutes and why it's important, and it doesn't move you in some way, then I'm not doing my job in terms of building these things. So we do that. Why? We also need to figure out the character's starting points. And then once we figure out their starting points, we need to look at what their ending point is. This seems, again, very obvious. I will tell you that it's really hard. This is not easy to do, to find something that's compelling, that will keep people in their seats for 90 minutes. And sometimes that can evolve. That's fine. This whole part of the process is really about finding and clarifying this. And that honestly takes years, and sometimes you have to scrap things and try again. But once you have emotionally where you want the character to start and emotionally where you want the character to wind up, you kind of have a story. And once you kind of have a story, at least in Disney animation, that's where the real fun begins. And that's where, to me, it opened up this whole new world. Because that is where you bring in story artists. Story artists at Disney, and mostly in animation, it's kind of like a writer, but a writer who doesn't write words on a page, but delivers sketches and drawings. They are visual. And what that means is you're both speaking a story language as you're trying to figure out more about the character, and you are pushing in a plot. But as you can see here, like, people are giving you ideas that are, here's an expression or an emotion, or here's a scene between characters, and you're building that together. And some of these things might not have any place in the movie at all. Some of these are just a way to make you feel something, to get you to care about a character, or to really enjoy the vibe of one specific moment. But just like a TV writer's room, there are 10 or 12 of us sitting around a table really beating on these concepts. We're being as brutally honest with each other as we possibly can because we're trying to make it better. We're trying to make it deeper. We're trying to surprise our audience and hopefully at the end of the day, find a way to make them think differently. Once we've beat things up on this board, this can take months, this process, and we go through several iterations of that. But once we feel like it's largely in a place that makes sense, we go to the scripting phase. And that's usually when you have a screenwriter will hop off and take some time to go write the screenplay. In live action, I would typically take 2 or 3 months and try to work on a script. At Disney Animation, I typically go off for 2 days. Not a whole lot of time. Why do I do that? Because I want to not deliver an entire script that I've thought the whole thing through. I want to deliver pieces that we can discuss. It is a collaboration. I want to find out what feels good to people immediately, what does not feel good to people immediately. And just like those the boards you saw earlier, we beat it up a lot and we discuss it, and everything is very open. No one is precious. But eventually, once this feels good, we move to the next phase, which is visualization. So just taking this as an example, this is from Moana. So that little paragraph up there, which I'll just kind of go through very briefly. This is in the Cavern of the Ancestors. Moana rushes down to the boats, walking amongst the huge canoes in awe. She spots a smaller canoe near the pool of water leading through a waterfall. Moana jumps onto the hull and maneuvers the boom, but as the sail swings, it reveals a massive double-hulled canoe. Okay, for me, this might take half an hour to write that. But then I will hand it to an artist, and these guys will spend 2 weeks visualizing what that looks like. Keep in mind, we have scripts that are about 90 to 100 pages. So there is a ton of work that goes on for this to be possible. And as our board artists get into it, they are not just artists, they are cinematographers, they are actors. They're the ones that say where the camera is placed. They're the ones that tell us what the emotion of the character is as they're walking through this world. It is a really difficult, amazing job. I'm in awe of these people because they have to intuit all of it on their own. A lot of people will ask sort of the process of animation getting to this point. Many things that are done in storyboarding find their way into the final version of the movie. You'll see a specific expression or a specific camera setup that will make its way all the way through that process because these people are wizards. So in order to do this, I'll give you a little sense of what things look like. Not that, this one right here. Let's see. Will it go? It's not going. Hold on. Huh? Yeah. Okay, so this is our story team, our writing room. And an artist, when they finish with their storyboards, will come in and they'll pitch through it on a computer like this, and we'll literally watch the movie unfold. For the majority of our movies, so 4 to 6 years, animation only comes in the last 18 months of the process. Until that point, we see our movies like this. And we see our movies in storyboards, maybe black and white sometimes. People will color it a little bit, but that's not the point. We really are trying to find out very quickly what the emotions of the characters are and to really prove out those beats. And by the way, this is real time. That's like sped up. This is what makes me insane because you'll be talking about a character and someone will draw something that quickly and show it to you, and it'll be perfect and amazing or make you cry. I've never been in an environment that is that creative because you are really building story in real time and visualizing it in real time. So the story team is not just cinematographers and amazing writers and actors. They are really strong problem solvers. And part of a job as a writer and a director is to work with them to solve problems as they arise over the course of figuring out what the story is. Which brings me to the story of Hey Hey. So I don't know if you guys have seen Moana. If you have, you will know that there's this chicken in the movie. Now, Hey Hey started out much differently than he wound up in the movie. So I'm going to show you what he used to be. He used to be a pretty mean chicken, you guys. He was very judgy, a lot of this all the time. And I also like these boards because you can kind of just go back and forth like this forever, right? No matter what you want to do, he hates you, doesn't like it. That's Hey Hey. He was smart, he's very judgmental, but probably a year out from the movie hitting theaters, we found out that he did not work in the story. He was not pushing Moana in the right way. She's our main character. His smart judginess was not helping her. And we had a lot of conversations, and we decided a year out from the movie being released, Hey Hey is out of the film. We have to write him out. He's no longer a character in this movie. I got a lot of hate email. A lot of people in the studio were like, what, you can't lose the chicken? And we said, but he's not helping us yet. And so we racked our brains to figure out a way to keep him in the movie. But I ultimately thought, you know what, he's probably gone. And so they said, all right, Jared, go off. Take 2 days and write Hey Hey out of the movie. He's gone. And I went off to write, and I got horribly ill. And I don't know if someone in the story team put something in my food or not, but I spent a lot of time not in bed, other places of my house. And while I was indisposed, the story team worked their asses off to try to find a new way to save Hey Hey. And they came up with a solution that adjusted just one thing, which is that. They went from this guy to that guy. That was the fix in their mind's eye. And we said, okay, that sounds great. How does that work? And they said, okay, well, let's show you. So they did some exploratory boards, and they said, okay, here's a bunch of chickens eating their food, and here's Hey Hey eating a rock. And then, you know what? Moana's this very compassionate character. She sees this poor idiot rooster. She gives him some food. Let's help this guy out. So Hey sees that. He's like, oh, great food. And comes over and keeps eating the rock. That was awesome. Okay, how did that help, right? We were all excited, but why would that help? I'm going to show you using one of the early versions of one of our scenes. In this scene I'm about to show you, Moana has this thing called the Heart of Te It's this special stone she's trying to take across the ocean. That's really the plot driver of the movie. And she comes across these bandits, these kind of pirates called the Kakamora, and they want that stone and they're trying to take it from her. And this was boarded by one of our amazing story artists, one of our lead story artists actually, named John Ripa, who's a wizard. Anytime there's anything awesome in a movie, he's the guy at Disney Animation that boards it. Any massive action sequence, he figures it out because I don't know how his brain works. But here's the original version. Okay, here we go. Here's Moana and one of the Kakamora, okay? That thing around her neck, that's this necklace, and inside the necklace is this Heart of Te Fiti. So he's trying to get that, and they're struggling, and what? It pops out. There's the Heart of Te Fiti, and he grabs that thing, and he says, I'm out of here, and he climbs up the mast, and he gets on this pulley and goes up and gives it to his chief. Here you go, buddy. And nope, Moana comes in. She snatches the Heart of Te Fiti and gets out of there. Pretty awesome. The scene's much bigger. It took him a really long time. You can see all those little pencil marks. It takes forever. Really cool. And we said, that's awesome. But then we say, what if we add this idiot into that same equation? What happens then? Well, let's take a look. And one of our board artists took John's original boards and said, I'm going to add some things. Here we go. Just like before. Kakamora's trying to get that Heart of Te Fiti. Gonna get it, and it pops out, and oh, he misses it this time. And where does it go? Bonk, bonk, bonk. Over to this dummy. What does this guy do? He eats it. Okay. Uh-oh. What? Now what are we gonna do? Right? Kakamora goes after the chicken this time, right? I'm grabbing that chicken, and now instead of lifting the stone, he's lifting a rooster. Right? Funnier, better. And here's a rooster, chief. I'm gonna give you this rooster. Nope. Moana comes in and snatches a rooster. She makes it back to her boat, and bleh, and out comes the stone, right? What does that mean? Comedy plus complication equals better. It was undeniably better. And by the way, once we saw this, why did it work better? Because Moana is this compassionate character. When she's going up against a jerk, she kind of has to fight that jerk and wouldn't want that jerk around. When she goes up against Hey, this little moron, she actually has to protect him. And no matter what he does, he keeps trying to kill himself over the course of the movie. It'd be really easy for her to just dump him and continue on, but that's not who she was. So it actually helped with character, and he basically became this complication generator. And true story, the day that we found out that Hey was going to be in the movie, we celebrated with a fried chicken dinner. And that is true. Okay, let's move to the Zootopia for a second. The world of Zootopia, which, like I said, is really a story of bias and stereotype, focuses on Judy Hopps. She's a little rabbit right there. And early on, she's comes from Bunny Burrow, way outside of the city, and she wants to become a real cop, and so she moves to the city. And on her first day, where she's given parking duty instead of being a real cop, she intersects with this fox named Nick and she believes his son, and he's not being treated well because he's a fox, and in this world, foxes, people don't really like them or trust them. And so he's having this trouble trying to buy a Jumbo Pop, and she goes, you know what? I'm going to help you out today, Fox. I'm going to buy you and your little boy here a Jumbo Pop. Have a great day. In Zootopia, anybody can be anything. And he's like, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And she goes about her day. But then she happens to see him with that Jumbo Pop, melting it down in Sahara Square. This is sort of the warm weather climate of the city. And then refreezing that juice into smaller popsicles in Tundra Town. And then selling it to lemmings. And the great thing about lemmings is when one of them buys it, they all buy it. Right? It's a pretty good scam. And she sees this, and she's really pissed. She's been duped. She's also sitting next to these little mouse porta potties, which are one of my favorite things ever. They're so adorable. I want to use one of those. So Judy goes, she confronts Nick, and and he basically says, it's on you. You were naive. P.S., you're never going to be a real cop. You're always going to be a dumb bunny. And she feels terrible. And she heads back to her tiny little apartment that night, and she's starting to worry that maybe he's right. And that led to a pivotal scene that underwent a pretty important change. So I'm going to show you guys that scene. This is what we call an animatic. An animatic is where we take a bunch of the storyboards, we edit them together, we put sound effects to it. A lot of times we add our own dialogue before we have the real actors in. This is kind of half and half. We put music to it, and this is how we watch our movies and screen these movies for the bulk of our production schedule. Okay, so Nick just made her feel like crap. Here we go. It's so quiet. Nope. I'm going to get this, you guys. There we go.
That positive under your pillow. I love you, honey, very much.
All right. So that is one of the original versions of that scene. And for me, I always found it emotional and compelling, and it really worked as a scene. But as we continued down our path, there was something in this area that kept being a problem, and we couldn't figure it out. And we looked at the scene before the scene and the scene after the scene, and we had this problem where we couldn't launch Judy out of this moment. Everything kind of came to a stop, and it was a little sad, and she kind of felt like, well, I'm going to try a little bit harder tomorrow, but she wasn't energized. And for us, a lot of the times we want our characters to be proactive and really leap into the next part of the movie. So we looked at this scene a lot and tried some new things. We shrunk it down a little bit, and we found ways to, instead of making her kind of sad emotional, that she kind of got defiant. And we put some more, instead of her parents comforting her parents challenged her, and it changed the dynamic of the scene very much. So this is early animation of the new version of that scene that I'll show you guys now so you can see the difference. I'm gonna, it's gonna work? Yes.
How was your first day on the force?
It was real great.
Yeah? Everything you had hoped?
Absolutely. And more. Everyone's so nice, and I feel like I'm only making it.
Wait a second. What in Christ's name is that?
Oh, my sweet stuff. Julie, are you okay?
Oh, no, it's just a temporary thing.
Oh, it's a big show on force.
Oh, she's done real tough. Our prayers have been answered.
Glory day.
Oh, Peter Betty. Peter Betty.
Dad! You know what? It's been a really long day. I should go.
Right, get some rest.
Those Peter's not going to make themselves.
Come on.
Bye-bye.
So that gave her, oh, here we go. That gave her a very different launch out of the scene, and it made her want to prove everybody wrong. Her parents loved her, but weren't giving her what she needed. So actually similar to Hey Hey, where you want to have a character have to move forward, and you want complications to be there, but you want them to succeed in spite of those things. And once we made those changes, even adding more humor to the scene, it happened very quickly. Now, interestingly, even though these movies take so long to make, that we did in a day. The scene wasn't working. We went up to a writer's room, me and Phil, who co-wrote the movie with me, and our editor and the directors. We sat around and we wrote that scene on the fly. The songs that you hear in that are on the radio actually came off of Phil's laptop, and he just recorded those into a microphone. The next door neighbors that say, like, shut up, that's me and my friend Byron, and we were supposed to replace it, but we had no time, so that's just us idiots on a really bad microphone, not in a studio, and we just went with it. It was like, we gotta go right now. So weirdly, after 6 years, like, it comes down to 3 hours in a story room working together to try to find a way to make it work. So what did we learn from that? Iteration minus preciousness equals better. We didn't try to hang on to the fact that that previous scene was emotional or felt good. It actually didn't serve the movie as a whole. It was hurting us. It was hurting the character. And so we really rely on people within our studio to tell us what does not work. So, like I said, we have, everyone in our building, there's about 800 of us, but for each time we go through a beat board that turns into an outline, that turns into a script, that turns into a storyboard, then goes into edit and becomes one of those animatics like I showed you, we bring the entire studio in, regardless of what your role in the studio is, to give notes and feedback. So you get notes from 400 to 600 people, and they don't hold back. They say anything that bothers them, they tell you, and you get very specific emails. And it's hard, but it's awesome, and we really appreciate that brutal honesty. That's the only way to make something better, or to find perspectives outside of your own that is so important to telling stories, to really kind of get a sense of, certainly for us, where we're really pushing stories out to the world, we want to make sure that it's not just our singular vision that goes out there, but a sense that a lot of people will hopefully relate to these stories. So we take those 400 to 600 people's ideas and thoughts, we look back at the movie that we're building, at the script, at the storyboards, at literally hundreds of thousands of drawings, hundreds of drafts. We take all of that stuff and we throw it in the trash. Yes, we do, all the time. And it's awesome. It's actually super awesome to not worry that you have to hold on to everything. In fact, most of the course of our movie, we are not really trying to figure out, weirdly, what works. It's a process of weeding out what does not work. And we're allowed to try 1,000 things, even more than that. We are trying to be as creative as possible, and if it doesn't work, fine, it can leave. But the stuff that doesn't leave stays in. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as you're throwing out everything that doesn't work, you're left with what does by process of elimination. We repeat that process constantly for 4 to 6 years. So we will screen the movie 12 times internally and go through the whole thing and rip movies apart. And I don't just mean changing a character or a plot point. Sometimes we actually throw every part of the movie away. We put it in the trash. So Zootopia actually started as a spy movie set on a fantasy island. That's not what the movie became. The original story of Moana, she went out on the ocean with 12 members of her family. There's a version where Maui was the main character of that story. In Zootopia, there was, for a long time, Nick the Fox was the main character of the story, and Judy was the supporting character. Ultimately, we want to really get back to that nugget. What do we want to say with this movie? And whatever we have to do to achieve that in the best way possible, in the most compelling way possible, that's what we try to do. So this constant process, to me, honestly, is a huge luxury to be able to take that many bites at the apple, to try so many times, to feel that you're being supported by a company of 800 people trying to find a way to make this work, and you're given the leeway to be as creative as you can is a massive luxury, which is why I say, honestly, the 1,000th time's the charm, because by the time we get there, we usually have something somewhat coherent. So that's where I'm going to end off today. I'd love to hear if you guys have any questions or thoughts or about the process or storytelling or any of it. Oh, thanks. Yes.
So when you're working on a project that takes 4 to 6 years, how many projects are you working on at once? Or is like Utopia 4 to 6 years, and Moana 4 to 6 years?
You're primarily assigned to one. But what's great about working in Disney Animation is that you're also helping out on everything else that is in development or production. Not full-time, but for right now, for instance, my week is typically 60 to 65% working on my movie. The other part is going to other people's story rooms, hearing where they're at, having them talk through their process, what they're excited about, their characters, and giving feedback. And that can be as they're just starting out, and it's a very nascent project, or it's something that's deep into production. So for instance, when I first got to Disney, Wreck-It Ralph, the first one, was coming out maybe 2 months after I started to work there, so it was basically done. Next up after that was Frozen, and so I got to be part of a lot of those early story building things as they were trying to figure out what their story was, and they actually ripped that movie down to the studs and began again. Similarly with Big Hero 6, and pretty much all of our movies have this moment of crisis where you go like, oh, we're going to have to change everything, and you kind of go into this fugue state where you can't hear anything for a while, and there's this ringing in your ears, but then the next day you're like, okay, let's get back in and do it. But to me, what's really freeing is by going to someone else's project, it actually opens up your eyes to issues on your own. So a lot of the times, something will not be working on my movie, and I'll go to someone else's and I'll be like, oh, it's so easy, just do this and this and this, and I'll go, that's exactly what my problem is on mine. It gives you, I think, a sense of clarity. Yeah.
Where do the songs come from for the movies? Like Frozen and Moana are very musical. There's a lot of musical numbers. Mm-hmm. Where do those come from? It is a very,
I think, a composer-specific, lyricist-specific question. So, for instance, Bobby and Kristen Lopez, who did the music for Frozen, they were very much a part of the building of the story, and they wanted to get musical ideas in early. On Moana, Lin-Manuel Miranda was the songwriter there, he along with Mark Mancina and Obadiah Hawaii. And they did early on a couple of tone pieces. There's a scene in the movie where you see the great navigating history of the people of Moana's island. That was one of the first things they did. But later songs, like the Tamatoa song with the big crab or the Maui You're Welcome song, for those, we really needed to understand the characters. And so for those, I would actually write the scenes as if they were dialogue and not songs, and then give those scenes to Lin, and he would take them in and reinterpret them as music. So it really is kind of where you are in the process, and then also what a specific songwriter likes. The current movie I'm working on, we are trying to do a hybrid of both of those things and find a way to bring in musical storytelling early and establish some themes and a vibe. But then as we get down the road, I will probably similarly write scenes that say, here's who this character is, and then find a way to marry that to music.
Since a big part of this conference has to do with fairy tales, and I am old enough that a lot of the Disney movies from my past were based around that, I'm thinking about the movies you've been working on or that you've talked about are kind of more original ideas, not necessarily adapted ideas. Yeah. And I'm just wondering how that process changes, or if that is something that Disney is kind of moving away from. I know that Tangled is, kind of a Rapunzel story, and I do have a fairy tale for you if you're interested.
Good.
I have a favorite, Hans Christian Andersen, that hasn't been made, and I've been waiting my whole life to see it. So
awesome.
Anyway, I just thought you maybe want to talk about that a little bit.
So it's a great question. I wouldn't say that Disney is moving away from fairy tales. I think it's definitely something that is, it's very Disney. I think the trick is to deliver a different type of story that the audience will not be ahead of, or taking a fairy tale that is largely meant to be a 5-minute or a 10-minute story and finding a way to make that a 90-minute story. And so typically when you do that, you discover that you have to go much deeper with the characters, and that makes some of the early fairy tales difficult because you're having to invent things that weren't a part of that story or fundamentally change what the message of that is, and it becomes tricky. Now that said, I think that as we're moving forward, like I say, Moana is more mythology than it is fairy tale by design, right? Fairy tales don't exist in the Pacific Islands. It's something different. And so I think us also trying to find ways to tell different types of stories also kind of fold into that, because fairy tales are so often European. It kind of narrows down the type of characters who can be on screen or the type of actors that can voice those parts. And so I think in an attempt to broaden what type of stories we can put out into the world and should put out into the world, that's changed the focus a little bit. Yep.
I've been tweeting your speech to my 5-year-old niece who loves Moana. And she has a question for you.
Great.
She was very concerned about the turtle that Moana saves when she's a baby.
Yeah.
She wants to know if that turtle turned out okay and if the birds ended up getting enough to eat.
Okay, that's a really good question. I haven't gotten that before. Actually, sadly, the turtle went on to lead a life of crime. It's not in the movie. That little turtle, actually, it's interesting you picked that scene. That scene was not supposed to be in the movie. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's this early on, baby Moana, she's about 3 years old, finds this baby turtle who's having trouble getting to the beach past these giant birds, and she facilitates the journey to get there. That was only part of this movie because as a test of character and what will the ocean feel like when it actually comes to life, Chris Williams, who was a co-director of Moana and also a director of Big Hero 6, boarded that scene just to give people a sense of the wonderment of the ocean coming to life in front of this little girl. And it was so spellbinding by the time it was animated that we found that we had to find a way to make it work within the movie. So that little turtle obviously does make it into the water. And it's funny because we went back and forth on whether or not to see that turtle again at some point. I think some of the reality part of our brain were like, well, how would it get like thousands of miles across the ocean? And then the logic police came in and said, can't see that turtle anymore. But I think in our minds, that turtle kind of is a representation of Moana's journey of the movie, where she has this draw to the water like the turtle does. There are these huge obstacles in her way. The ocean doesn't pick Moana up and take her where she needs to go, just like Moana doesn't pick up the turtle and take it to the ocean. She just helps get some of the negative stuff out of the way to allow her to be who she's meant to be, which is likewise what happens with the turtle. And so once we found that as our way in, and it really, in our minds, was encapsulated the entire story of Moana, it found its way into the movie and had a place there. Bless you.
I have a
So you talked a lot about the preciousness and like having to scrap everything all the time. I struggle a lot with scrapping things like that. So I wonder, does it get easier, and is there kind of a sense of freedom when you do start over after the initial panic of, oh my God, I have to undo everything I just did?
It does not get easier, but you trust it more, if that makes sense. So I find that I still today I'll write something. I go through this process. I think anyone who's creative probably goes through this process, which is, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it. I'm going to put something out. No, I hate this, and I'm going to work on it. It's getting better and better, and now I can share it, and it's awesome. And then 1 second later, I go, I hate it. It's the worst thing I've ever done, and I should never try to do this again. But then rebuilding comes, and you go through that same process again. So I find that letting go of things is still hard. I think that I'm probably better than I used to at realizing why something needs to change, or asking somebody, okay, I get that you don't like this. Why don't you like this? Is it because this specific you don't like? Is it the feeling of it that you don't like? Is the intent of the scene wrong, or is it an execution issue? And so I spend a lot of my time trying to understand where those thoughts come from, and usually they are very smart, well thought out ideas, and I'll adjust accordingly. Because at the end of the day, you want the movie or whatever you're working on to be great and to affect people. And if there's something that's getting in the way of that, it's just words on a page. It's really, honestly, really easy to adjust, and I found that as movies, certainly these, as they get into animation and you have 400 people working on a scene, when it has to change then, it's kind of on the writer to be like, you could have changed this a long time ago, and these people have been working weekends for the last 6 months. Maybe, make that adjustment early on and it's just you. So I think that, preciousness, I guess that's where I got it from television. To avoid preciousness is really important. We try as hard as we can, but we're also still human and creative people, and some things you just love, and you kind of say, but I just love it, and you have to take a good look at, is it helping your character, is it helping your story? Yes?
So one thing about Disney movies, especially lately, is there's a lot of different cultural aspects from outside cultures, but they remain very relatable and understandable to Americans. And I just was curious if there was a specific process that goes into that, or if there's a specific person you consult with.
Yeah, well, all of that. So it's incredibly important, I think, to bring in perspectives from all over the world or within our world, things that are not yourself, right? I can tell a movie from my perspective, but there's 1,000 other perspectives that are important and valid. And so typically, I think when we do our jobs right, we build stories from universal human truths, right? And so it's not necessarily culture specific, which hopefully allows stories to resonate in different cultures. Like I think, so just if you guys don't know, Pixar was started by Ed Catmull and John Lasseter. They then came down 10 years ago and took over Disney Animation and brought down this sort of Pixar model of how to do things. They just put out Coco, which is a movie set exclusively in Mexico. Everything in the movie, the music, the actors, everybody, it's all 100% Mexico. What was really interesting is that it's now the biggest Pixar movie in China of all time, because the Chinese audience felt it was such a Chinese story. It was the story of family and the difficulties within family and a tie to the ancestors. And so to me, what that told me is like, okay, great. So they did a really good job of finding a story that was distinctly Mexican, but also didn't exclude anybody else, which is really important. To do that, we partner with people all around the world. So for instance, on Moana, we had a story trust of people from the Pacific Islands, and that was elders and fishermen and dancers and tattoo artists, anthropologists, linguists, because we didn't want to just guess at what was important. We wanted those people to be our creative partners in making the movie, and not just at the end where we say, like, what do you think? It was the entire way. Every time I wrote something, it was emailed, and I would get feedback immediately. And that kept us honest, and it hopefully allowed us to add a perspective that we could not achieve on our own. For Zootopia, we talked to a lot of different people dealing with stereotype and bias in every version of what that looked like. Most importantly, we had a professor, Dr. Shakti Butler, and she, I think, was the most profound effect in the movie. She had done a lot of work in inclusion and also stereotype and bias and the patterns that develop. And again, she didn't ever talk about specifically this group or that group. It was more a pattern of systemic behavior and our own culpability within that. And that really opened up our eyes. So originally with that movie, the reason it was told through Nick's perspective is he was a character, the fox, he was a character who felt like the world was against him, and he was kind of in this broken world, and he learned to kind of hope. That's ultimately wasn't as compelling as the character of Judy, who, as a rabbit, felt like she was being treated unfairly, but felt that she had evolved past looking at anybody's specific stereotypes. But the truth was, and what she discovered was, even though she felt biased against and was probably the most proactive, evolved character, she had not gotten all the way there yet. She had this unconscious bias within herself that she needed to work on, and ultimately that destroyed her relationship at the end of the second act, and it was something that she had to learn in the third act. We wouldn't have gotten there without Shakti coming in to talk to us, but more importantly, to really look around the studio, talk to people, and get a really broad sense of what that is.
So I have 2 questions. I'll give you the easy one first.
Okay.
What do you think is your characteristic that makes you most valuable to Disney, or that they're willing to keep you beyond 8 weeks?
I don't know. I'd like to know that. I think that, weirdly, I never planned to work in television and then work in features and then go to animation. And oddly, it was the best preparation to work in animation because you kind of have to be incredibly collaborative, but also look at story from a feature standpoint of building large character arcs, world building. And so I think weirdly, it made me kind of like the skill set that they need, I had just by my experience. That said, it's really less about me and more about the culture. And when I got there, it's a culture of trust. We call our groups Story Trust. We have writers and directors, members of our story team, artists, and honestly, every meeting we're in, someone cries in that meeting. And they cry, not because someone's being mean, but because they are sharing really difficult stories with the group in order to find that resonance and to find true emotion. And they bring themselves, and that takes an unbelievable amount of trust to do that. And that hopefully allows us to find deeper levels of character emotion and story emotion because we're doing that. And then to put yourself out there, you guys all know, any creative person, when you deliver something, it kind of feels like they're critiquing you because if you're putting yourself on the page or you're putting yourself on a canvas, it's hard not to take that personally. But in that environment, everybody knows that and everyone appreciates that. And at the end of every meeting, as much as everybody cries, at the end of every meeting I've been in, people applaud every single meeting, which is coming from a sitcom writer's room, which is known to be a little prickly, going to a place where people are hugging everyone and there's applause was very different. And I kept on wondering, like, what is happening? They're going to murder me in here one day. What is going on? But to me, I think trust is a big part of that. And honestly, having faith in the people around you and giving into that.
The other one, which might be a little bit more difficult, is how much pressure in this environment of 800 people do you get for not only that you have to create a great movie, but don't forget we're going to put it on Broadway to make a lot of money on it too, so don't write something we can't put on Broadway.
It's interesting. Weirdly, we are in a little bubble. And inside our little bubble, we are just trying to create the best stories we can for ourselves, for the people within the building. And I don't mean that to mean that we don't care about outside thoughts, but really, if it doesn't work internally, if we're not feeling it internally, you guys have all seen movies where sad music comes in and a character looks weepy, and you're like, I'm not buying this at all. This doesn't work for me. We're trying to find ways to make that more human and more real. And so the pressure of the big machine, it's kind of there in the background, but you don't really see it. 99% of what we do is just inside our own building, and no one ever sees it. Even the 600 to 800 people part of it doesn't happen until you're about halfway through that 4 to 6 year process. It's really 10 to 30 people, and you're just in there kind of in this vortex where you're trying to find something that feels meaningful. And so we are largely spared that pressure. I think if I thought about it too much, it would freak me out. But ultimately, if something feels compelling to you, and it feels compelling to a group of people, you kind of hope that it will resonate outside. You don't know until the movie comes out. But it is, I'd say, there's one thing that everybody looks forward to, which is that once you're done and a movie is in a theater and you go and see it with an audience that's not within your building, there's something very special about it. And I think that everybody knows that at some point you'll get there. And it's never one person making this movie. It's never 10 people making this movie. It is hundreds of people all adding something special and personal. And so it really feels like no one person is going to fail. It feels like as a team, we all hopefully succeed together. Yeah.
How are the actors chosen? And then where in the process are they chosen? And then does the animation change according to who is chosen too?
That's a really good question. Usually actors are brought in after about a year and a half or 2 years of working on the movie. Before that point, you saw in the animatics, we internally voice the characters ourselves. And what that means is, like, you'll find somebody who might make a good Maui or might make a good Moana or a good father, and you'll put those people in and we'll test out what that dialogue feels like. Eventually, when it's ready to bring in an actor, that's usually a process where we have an amazing casting department. They will work with the filmmaking team. Typically, that would be the producer. But really, it's director and writer who are trying to find people who match the characters of the film. So we typically don't cast people that we think are like superstar actors because we want a superstar actor in the movie. We cast people that we think are really, truly going to be part and embody that character. And largely when those people come in, we don't have them put on a voice or try to be somebody different. That usually happens day one. Someone comes in and is like, it's a cartoon, and here's my wacky voice. We're like, no, we want you for you. I think a really good example of that is Jason Bateman when he came in on Zootopia. He was so him, and he really was that character. As a writer, I could then write specifically to his voice as opposed to an archetype of a character like that. But nothing is animated until all of that dialogue is locked. So what that means is that once we have, as we're going through the process and we do these animatics, eventually those animatics only have our real actors in them. And at that point, our animators then listen to that and match exactly what their mouths and even expressions are doing. So we always have multiple cameras on our actors when they're in a sound studio because we will try to bring in those tiny little personal details they're doing in their acting into those characters. Dwayne Johnson as Maui is another great example of that. He really brought a lot of himself in that, and they tried to put as much of his personality into that character. As also being part Samoan was really important to the process. So we try to find people who really love to be there. They are our team members as we're working through these movies. It's not, I think, a typical actor storytelling team relationship. We get to know each other really, really well, and we spend a lot of time with each other. And for me, I'm always excited to see what they do that surprises me. I never ask for, here's a line, give it to me exactly the way I had it in my head. We sit and we try 10 versions or 20 versions of a lot of different types of emotions into the scene because you never know what it's going to feel like when you actually put it up. Or you might go like, I thought it was supposed to be comedic, but if it's more sincere, it actually means something, or vice versa. So we spend a lot of time just trying different variables. And I find that the actors who really are able to be nimble and try different things are the most successful. Yeah.
In Moana, did you have to scrap the ocean's character multiple times, or did you get it right the first time?
We have digital wizards who spent months and months and months figuring out what that ocean might look like. To start that process actually came from not visual, but a story question, which was, is the ocean someone who always helps her, or does the ocean push her, but sometimes it's kind of a jerk, or is the ocean confusing? Does the ocean know everything, or is the ocean still trying to figure out what's going to happen next? And so we really had to answer those questions before the animation team could go and say, I think this is the tone of it. And even late in the process, the idea that sometimes the ocean kind of rises up into kind of this cone-like shape and almost has a face, you know, it kind of can wobble its head and you kind of get a sense like it's a yes or a no. That came very late because people, when the ocean was just kind of rippling differently, they couldn't read human emotion into the ocean. And it wasn't until they came up with that and really found ways to make the ocean feel human that made the biggest change. That said, when they started Moana, for the first year and a half, they did not have the technology to make the ocean. They knew this. They said, we don't have this technology. It's not possible. All of our amazing tech people writing code, we're going to need you guys to figure out in the next year and a half a way to make that possible, or this movie cannot be produced. And so it's not just creative or story or technical. Everybody has to work in concert to build something together. Yeah.
What was your favorite movie to work on and why?
This is a tricky one, and I think Steve alluded to it earlier. It's weird. Every project I've ever worked on, you really have to throw yourself in. And in the moment, it has to be your most favorite thing ever, because you really start to know the characters that become your friends, and the story that you're trying to tell becomes very, you get to this point where you just want to put this out into the world, and it's really important. I'd say that for me, Zootopia was an amazing experience. It was the first time I had a feature film produced, and I started from scratch in building it. And so I got to walk through the entire process of that. But honestly, what felt the best was the message of the movie. Certainly looking, I think, at our world today, and hopefully being able to say something about bias and stereotype in a way that was accessible, and hopefully was something that adults and younger people could both learn something from, was really important to me. It's, to have the opportunity to say something that hopefully resonates was just an amazing opportunity, and it was a whirlwind, and it was really hard. It took a lot out of everybody who worked on that movie, but at the end of the day, we had something that was really special. We actually had a documentary crew from the Fusion Network follow us the entire length of that movie early on, and we didn't know what it was going to be. But in watching that documentary back for me, it's an amazing kind of diary of 1,000 human emotions for me, because you had these great highs and great lows. But at the end of the day, I've had people come up to me and say that it saved their marriage, or they can finally talk to their family in a different way than they could, or they could come out. And these are, to put something out into the world that has an actual human direct effect on people, was amazing. And I think Moana was a very different type of story, but I felt so welcomed in by all of the members of our Oceanic Story Trust. They were so willing to share their stories and to help me and to support me. I came onto Moana about a year and a half before it came out, so it had gone through a bunch of changes. And I think because Zootopia was such an up and down, I think they felt like I was used to that trauma, and knowing that there was a year and a half left in Moana, I would need a lot of work. They felt that might be a good match. But for me personally, it was a really, honestly, kind of a spiritual experience, and really looking at the many cultures of the Pacific Islands was an eye-opener for me, and a different way to connect. And I really loved her character, and thinking about, as an adolescent who's trying to push back against her parents and find herself, I really put myself into that story as well. So it's kind of a tie, because it's not exactly the same thing, but I honestly just love them both. Yeah.
In Zootopia, the sloths were amazing. And it was great, the first day, the long, long day. But when did the ending scene with the speeding ticket evolve?
Sorry, say that one more time?
When did the ending with the speeding ticket evolve?
Yeah, that was very late. So Flash the Sloth, one of our heads of story, that's kind of the leader of the story team, named Jim Reardon, as we literally pulled the whole movie apart when it went from being Nick's movie to Judy's movie, and we were putting more emphasis on her, we were trying to think what would be funny dynamics. Dynamics that speak to the stereotype of a sloth, but you can't really translate that stereotype into humans. I know a sloth is slow, so let's go at it. And so the idea that a sloth would be working the DMV, I think all of us got really excited. And if anyone has seen the scene, Judy is trying to figure out a license plate. She's trying to get the sloth to tell her what's the name, or what's this license plate, who does it belong to? For that scene, I actually got the same license plate on my actual car before the movie came out. I was like, this would be cool, I'll get that license plate. And I put it on my car, and a month later, someone stole it off my car after the movie came out. And I had to go to the DMV and the police department and tell them that license plate. And they read it back to me. It was like the exact scene was happening in real time with humans. And it was one of my it was one of my favorite things ever, because I was laughing. They were like, "You're crazy," but it meant a lot to me. Anyway, how did that last scene come about? We liked the idea. People really loved that Flash character, and we liked the idea of him coming back at the end of the movie, and him being the fastest animal in town, because it's really a movie about, yes, there's stereotypes, but there's always exceptions to stereotypes, and what you expect is sometimes different, and we wanted to play with that over the course of the whole movie. So that came in maybe 8 months before the movie came out. Originally, actually, that scene was much longer, and the reason he was speeding is because his pregnant wife was in the back seat, and he was taken to the hospital, and the movie actually ended with like a 5-minute labor scene, the longest labor scene of any movie of all time, as a sloth who had been in labor for 3 years finally gave birth to a tiny sloth. But we ran out of time to animate it. Anyway, yeah, that's the story of Flash. Yeah.
Just another question from my niece. She'd like to test a theory. She wants to know what the Kakamora look like underneath their shells. She thinks they're just a series of nesting coconuts, and they just keep getting smaller and smaller.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, interesting story about the Kakamora. There's this breakdown between what you can actually produce in a movie and creatively what you want. And we knew that we liked the idea of the Kakamora, loosely inspired by the Menehune in Hawaii. And when we got there, we're like, what would they look like? And it was kind of late in the process when they came in the movie, and we were told, you guys are out of money to make any new characters. And we're like, but we had this band of pirates, and we need them in the movie. And they said, well, you can't build them. And then one guy was like, what if we make them coconuts, and they all are just coconuts, and we just paint a different face that doesn't move? And they're like, we can do that. And so what the Kakamora look like on the inside, we never found out because we didn't have the budget to do it. And also what's great about that is then you always ask, what do those guys look like under there? I don't know. I always thought they were like kind of gremlins or something, but everyone else had different interpretations. I like that there are 1,000 nesting dolls of coconuts. So they could be anything. But yeah, sometimes because you're dealt kind of a difficult production situation, it forces you to be creative in another way. And I actually think that they were much funnier having just stuck on faces than they would have been had they been fully animated. Yeah.
Who came up with, or how did the idea come up to make like The Lion King and Pete's Dragon and Jungle Book, all of them like realistic?
So that is on the live action side of Disney. I don't have a whole lot of interaction with those guys, but I know that a lot of the stories, I think there's certainly a sense of nostalgia these days, and people kind of wanting to revisit stories of their childhood. But the cool thing about doing it in live action is it typically allows you to expand those stories a little bit, and for the early Disney animated movies, allows a greater depth of those characters and a little bit more psychology and honesty in those characters. So I think that there's a reason to do that because of that. I think that sometimes, honestly, it is filmmakers who grew up on those movies who just want to put their stamp on it and try something of their own and expand that, which is awesome. They want to explore those worlds, which I'm totally for. I hope one day they make a live-action Moana. That would be amazing. I'd love to see what that looks like. But I think that as they're kind of moving forward, I think that the idea of a character depth and psychology is playing a bigger part in movies today, and that's one way to do it.
All right, one last question.
What advice would you give to college students or anyone that would be looking to do screenwriting or script writing as a career?
Well, you already have a leg up in that you're thinking about it, which I didn't. I think that the most important thing is, Steve said earlier, is to try to write. I find that the reason I like to write quickly is because a blank page is daunting. I hate a blank page. It is so scary. It never stops being scary. Right now I'm working on things, I'm like, I got a blank page and I don't like it. So I think that early on the most important thing to do is to just write as much as possible. The great thing is that you can rewrite as much as you like. I think a lot of people make the mistake of starting and getting 10 pages in, and then I got to go back and make that 10 pages great, and then refine and refine and refine. You got to finish the whole thing, even if it's terrible, because you might get to the end of the movie and realize those first 10 pages shouldn't even be in the movie, and I just wasted 3 months trying to make this thing perfect that has no place here, or I chose the wrong character. And so moving quickly and trying and seeing the whole is really important. I think that passion, you can't do anything without passion. You can't do anything without putting yourself on the page. I think in entertainment, probably 20 years ago, saying like, I got this crazy idea, and it's a Boy Scout, and he goes into space. Those days are kind of over, because I don't know if you're a Boy Scout or you like space, maybe, but I'd like to know who you are. And when I read something, I want to get a sense of, if I'm buying material or I'm investing in material, I'm actually investing in you. I'm investing in your point of view. I care about you, and you will be bringing something unique to the world of entertainment. That is the most valuable thing in Hollywood. More than an amazing story is an amazing talent who has a lot to say. So really digging down in terms of what you're passionate about and spending a lot of time to be unique as opposed to try to guess what you think a studio or production company might want. That they don't want what they want. You have to show them what they want, which is you and your distinct personality. Moving forward from there, I think that as you continue to write, festivals are a really good way for people to see your work. Internet is increasingly a great place where you can do shorts, or you can put little snippets of material out that really give people, again, getting a sense of who you are. And tenacity is the last one. Like I said, very few people break into Hollywood overnight. It is years and years of trying as hard as you can, failing so many times, but using those failures to learn and to find better ways to put yourself out there and to ask yourself more difficult questions. So anyway, thank you guys very much. I've had such a good time.